It ended not with a bang, but with a notice, a legal document stapled to a door, a tax lien filed by the Internal Revenue Service. The number was precise: $6,257,005. It was a bill for a life lived too large, a life lived in castles, a life that had become a public spectacle of ruin. The year was 2009. The global economy was in freefall, and in Hollywood, its most profligate son was falling with it, faster, harder, from a much greater height. Nicolas Cage, the Oscar winner, the action hero, the man who earned $20 million a picture, was broke, or something close to it. The reporters called it a collapse, a meltdown, a cautionary tale written in foreclosure notices and auction catalogs. In Bel Air, the great Tudor mansion sat empty, a palace of brick and timber on Copa de Oro Road, the Road of Gold. It once belonged to Dean Martin, then Tom Jones. It was a house built for legends. Cage had filled it with model trains and strange artifacts. Now, its 35 rooms echoed with silence. The bank was coming for it. In New Orleans, the ghost hunters had a new story to tell. Not about the tortured souls of Madame Laurie's attic, but about the movie star who bought their haunted house. He wanted to write a horror novel there. He wanted to absorb its darkness. Instead, the darkness absorbed him. That house, too, was heading to auction, along with another, a pristine white chapel he owned just blocks away, a place of sanctuary also lost. In Germany, a Bavarian castle stood watch over a quiet forest, Schloss Niedstein, a fortress from the 11th century. Cage bought it for his German-born mother, a fairy tale gift. Now it was just another asset on a spreadsheet, another dream to be liquidated. In England, a second castle. In the Bahamas, a private island. Gone, gone, gone. The list was biblical in its scope. 15 personal homes, 4 yachts, a Gulfstream jet, a fleet of 50 exotic cars, millions in jewelry, a dinosaur skull that had to be returned to Mongolia, pygmy shrunken heads, and Action Comics #1, the holy grail of comic books. All of it acquired in a frantic 2-decade-long quest. A quest for what? For status? For history? For a reality as vivid as the ones he created on screen? How does this happen? How does a man with a $150 million fortune end up with nothing but debt and a string of direct-to-video movies? How does a Hollywood prince, born into the Coppola dynasty, become a symbol of catastrophic financial implosion? The mansions hold the key. They were not just homes. They were characters in his tragedy. They were the dream, the excess, and finally, the ruin. To understand the fall, you must first understand the quest, the grail quest of Nicolas Cage, and the cursed empire he built to house his own myth. Hollywood has always been a town of dreams, a mirage in the desert, built on celluloid and desire. In the 1980s and 1990s, that mirage became a gold rush. The era of the blockbuster was born. A single movie could generate $1 billion, and the stars of those movies became modern-day kings. Their salaries exploded: $5 million, $10 million. Then came the $20 million club, a pantheon of actors whose very name could guarantee a film's success: Tom Cruise, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Julia Roberts, Jim Carrey, and Nicolas Cage. With the money came a certain expectation, a lifestyle, the sprawling mansion in the hills, the fleet of European cars, the entourage, the private jet. It was the uniform of success, a physical manifestation of one's place in the Hollywood hierarchy. For a generation of stars, wealth was not just something to be enjoyed, it was something to be performed. It was part of the brand. This was the world that awaited Nicolas Cage, a world ready to reward his talent with unimaginable riches, a world that encouraged excess, that celebrated it. It was a system that created gods and then watched with breathless anticipation to see if they would fly too close to the sun. It was a town that built palaces and then, when the time came, provided the wrecking balls. He was born a prince. Nicolas Kim Coppola. His father, August Coppola, was a professor of literature, a charismatic academic. His aunt was Talia Shire, the star of Rocky and The Godfather. His uncle was Francis Ford Coppola, the legendary director, the patriarch of a cinematic dynasty. He grew up in a world of art, ideas, and immense creative pressure. He was surrounded by genius and haunted by it. The name was a blessing and a curse. It opened doors. It also cast a long shadow. From a young age, he felt the weight of expectation, the assumption that his path was preordained, that he was just another Coppola. He needed to be his own man, to create his own myth. He found his escape in acting, but he would do it on his own terms. He dropped the famous surname. He became Nicolas Cage, a name inspired by two things: a modernist composer, John Cage, and a comic book superhero, Luke Cage, Power Man, a hero for hire with superhuman strength and unbreakable skin. It was a declaration of intent. He would be an artist, and he would be a superhero. He would be indestructible. His early years were marked by a fierce, almost feral energy. He was not handsome in the conventional Hollywood way. His face was a landscape of angles and intensity. His choices were strange, unpredictable. He ate a live cockroach on screen for Vampire's Kiss. He had 2 teeth pulled without anesthesia for Birdie. He was a devotee of what he would later call nouveau shamanism, a belief that the actor must become a conduit, a spiritual medium for the character. He wasn't acting, he was channeling. The industry didn't know what to do with him. He was too weird, too intense, but audiences were captivated. He was the quirky romantic lead in Valley Girl, the desperate baby-napping convict in the Coen brothers' Raising Arizona, the one-handed opera-loving baker in Moonstruck. He was building a career on the fringes, earning respect, but not yet a fortune. Then came Las Vegas. Leaving Las Vegas, his portrayal of a suicidal alcoholic drinking himself to death was a masterpiece of devastation. It was raw, unflinching. It felt less like a performance and more like a confession. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor. He had reached the summit. He had proven he was more than a Coppola. He was Nicolas Cage, an artist of the highest caliber. The Oscar changed everything. It gave him legitimacy, and it gave him power, the power to choose his own path. He made a choice that baffled the critics who had just crowned him. He chose to become Luke Cage, the superhero. He pivoted from serious drama to high-octane action. He became a box office titan. The trifecta was stunning. The Rock, Con Air, Face/Off. 3 massive, wildly successful action films released back-to-back. They were absurd, over the top, and they were perfect vehicles for his unique brand of operatic mania. The public loved it. The quiet intensity of Leaving Las Vegas was replaced by the bug-eyed, howling fury of a man who could and would do anything on screen. He became one of the most bankable stars in the world. The paychecks were staggering. $4 million for The Rock, $6 million for Con Air. By the end of the 1990s, he had joined the $20 million club. For films like Gone in 60 Seconds and National Treasure, he commanded a king's ransom. The money flowed in like a tidal wave, an endless, unstoppable torrent of cash. He had earned the fortune. Now he had to decide what to do with it. He needed a kingdom worthy of the king he had become. The decision was not merely to buy a home, it was to begin a quest. He called it his Grail quest, a personal search for holy objects. But his grails were not chalices or relics. They were properties, houses, castles, islands. Each one had to have meaning. It had to possess a history, a story, a mythology that he could absorb. It was not an investment strategy. It was a spiritual pursuit, a way to ground his fantastical life in something tangible, something real, something stone. It was a statement, a declaration of who he was, not a Coppola, not just an actor, but a connoisseur of the magnificent and the bizarre, a man who lived in a world of his own making. The houses were the bricks and mortar of that world. They were a defense against the mundane. He did not choose a single plot of land. He chose the world. His ambition was boundless. He wanted a castle in Bavaria, the land of his mother's birth and fairy tale kings. He wanted a historic country home in England, the seat of old aristocracy. He wanted a haunted mansion in New Orleans, the most Gothic of American cities. He wanted an oceanfront fortress in Newport, the Gilded Age playground of the Vanderbilts and Astors. He wanted a private island in the Bahamas, the ultimate symbol of escape. He wanted a palace in Bel Air, the heart of the Hollywood kingdom. It was not a collection, it was an empire, a scattered global empire of stone, glass, and history. He was not buying real estate, he was acquiring totems. Each purchase was an impulse, a feeling, a connection to a story he wanted to be a part of. He saw a castle in a magazine. He bought it. He heard a story about a haunted house. He bought it. The financial logic was secondary. The mythological logic was everything. He was the visionary, the curator. He did not hire a single architect to build a monument from scratch like a modern-day Hearst or Vanderbilt. His genius, or his madness, was in the acquisition, in the selection. He found the monuments that already existed and made them his own. He was a collector of magnificent shells, discarding the sea that made them. Once acquired, he would hire teams of decorators and artisans. He would fill the spaces with his obsessions, comic books, vintage cars, arcane artifacts. He would dictate the feeling, the atmosphere, this house for writing, this house for family, this house for solitude. It was a collaboration between his fantasy and the teams of people paid to realize it, a team of loyal assistants, managers, and staff who orbited his star, trying to keep the complex machinery of his life in motion. The logistics were a nightmare, a self-inflicted hurricane of paperwork and expenses. Imagine the challenge, managing 15 personal residences in 4 countries, on 2 continents, each with its own staff, its own maintenance needs, its own property taxes, its own utility bills. The sheer scale was mind-boggling. It was a corporation dedicated to the housing of one man's soul. On-site staff were required around the clock, gardeners to tend the acres of manicured lawns in England, housekeepers to dust the countless rooms in Bel Air, engineers to maintain the aging infrastructure of a Bavarian castle, a boat captain in the Bahamas, security teams everywhere. It was a private army, an entire village of people, all in service of the Cage empire, and the materials to fill these homes were sourced from across the globe. An antique mirror from a Parisian flea market, a rug from a Turkish bazaar, a suit of armor from a German auction. The world was his catalog, his private jet was the delivery truck. This was not the careful, considered construction of a Biltmore. This was a whirlwind shopping spree with an unlimited credit card, a frantic attempt to fill a void that was, perhaps, unfillable. The properties themselves were a catalog of architectural ambition and historical weight. They were characters in their own right, each with a distinct personality, each a reflection of a different facet of Cage's own complex identity. In New Orleans, he bought the most infamous house in the city, the LaLaurie Mansion, a grand, imposing building in the French Quarter with a history soaked in blood. In the 1830s, its owner, Delphine LaLaurie, was a wealthy socialite who was discovered to be brutally torturing and murdering her slaves in a secret attic chamber. The house was a monument to human cruelty, a place of profound and lingering darkness. Cage bought it in 2007 for $3.45 million. He said he wanted its ghosts to inspire him. He planned to write the great American horror novel within its walls. He was drawn to the darkness, believing he could master it. Just a few blocks away, he bought another piece of New Orleans history, the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Chapel, a beautiful historic building with a soaring steeple. It was a bizarre pairing, the city's most haunted house and a house of God. It showed the duality of his quest. He was collecting both demons and angels, sin and salvation. Then there were the castles, a boy's ultimate fantasy. In 2006, he purchased Schloss Niedstein, an 11th century castle in the Oberpfalz region of Bavaria, Germany. A storybook fortress with towers and ramparts set on a hill overlooking a pristine forest. It had 28 rooms. It covered 10,000 square feet. He paid $2.3 million for it. He said it was for his mother, Joy Vogelsang, who was of German descent, a way to connect with his roots, a grand romantic gesture. One castle was not enough. The next year, he bought Midford Castle, an 18th century folly near Bath, England. It was not a medieval fortress, but a romantic creation built in the shape of the ace of clubs. It was surrounded by 60 acres of parkland. It was the dream of an English country gentleman. He spent millions on renovations, planning to make it his British base. He was playing a role, Lord of the Manor. The crown jewel of his American holdings was the mansion in Bel Air, 363 Copa de Oro Road. He bought it in 1998 for $6.45 million. It was a sprawling, red-brick Tudor-style estate, a behemoth of Hollywood glamour. It had been owned by the singer Tom Jones, and before him, the Rat Pack legend Dean Martin. It was steeped in celebrity history. Cage expanded it, creating a 7-bedroom, 9-bathroom labyrinth of personal obsessions. A custom-built movie theater, a vast library, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and a room dedicated entirely to a massive electric train set. It was the command center of his Hollywood life. On the East Coast, he bought a piece of old money, Grey Craig, a magnificent 24,000 square foot stone manor in Newport, Rhode Island, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. It had 12 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, and sat on 27 acres of oceanfront land. This was the world of the Gilded Age tycoons, a world he, the new money movie star, could now enter. He was planting his flag on the most exclusive coastline in America. Even his home base, Las Vegas, the city that gave him his Oscar, was dotted with his properties. Not one, but several mansions, each more opulent than the last. One boasted a subterranean garage with space for 17 cars. It was a testament to his success in the very place that defined his artistic triumph. And finally, there was the ultimate symbol of untouchable wealth. The final frontier of the super-rich, a private island. He didn't just buy one, he bought two. He purchased a 40-acre island in the Exumas, a pristine archipelago in the Bahamas. It was part of the same chain where Johnny Depp, his friend and mentor, had his own private kai. It was paradise. Unspoiled beaches, turquoise water. A place to truly disappear. The cost was $3 million. Later, he would add another, smaller island to his collection. The sheer number of properties was staggering. At its peak, his portfolio included 15 personal residences, a home in Hollywood, a historic townhome in Bath, England, in addition to the castle, a beachfront house in Malibu, a condominium in New York, 2 apartments in Manhattan's San Remo building, a legendary address. The list went on and on. It was an empire built on impulse, financed by blockbuster movie checks. And it was glorious. And it was utterly, catastrophically unsustainable. The empire was built. The kingdom was established. The years from the late 1990s to the mid-2000s were the golden age of Nicolas Cage. He was at the apex of his fame and earning power. He was a constant presence on screen and in the tabloids. His life was a performance, and the estates were his magnificent stages. Life inside these homes was a whirlwind of activity and acquisition. The Bel Air mansion was the heart of his Hollywood operations, but it was less a party palace in the traditional sense and more a private museum of curiosities. Cage was not a great entertainer of the Hollywood elite. He was a collector, an obsessive curator of his own world. He filled these houses with treasures that were as eccentric as his acting style. He was a serious collector of comic books, owning some of the rarest and most valuable in the world. His copy of Action Comics #1, the first appearance of Superman, was a holy relic. He was a car fanatic, amassing a fleet of rare and exotic vehicles. A Ferrari Enzo, a 1971 Lamborghini Miura SVJ, once owned by the Shah of Iran, multiple Rolls-Royces. He owned so many he had trouble keeping track of them, but his taste ran to the truly bizarre. He bought a collection of pygmy shrunken heads. He owned a two-headed snake. He kept two albino king cobras named Moby and Sheba, which he claimed helped his acting. He bought a pet octopus for a reported $150,000, alleging it would also aid his craft. He famously outbid Leonardo DiCaprio for a 67-million-year-old Tyrannosaurus Rex skull at auction, paying $276,000 for it. It was later discovered to have been stolen from Mongolia, and he was forced to return it. The spending was relentless. He bought 4 luxury yachts, one of which, the Sarita, had 12 master bedrooms. He bought a Gulfstream private jet. He lavished money on jewelry and art. He was a one-man economic stimulus package. His business manager would later claim he had to have a wallet on a wheelbarrow just to keep up. In the public eye, Cage was a fascinating figure, a true original in an industry of manufactured personalities. His spending was the stuff of legend. It wasn't seen as vulgar. It was seen as part of his mystique. He was the mad genius, the eccentric artist, living life on a grand, operatic scale. He was playing the part of Nicolas Cage movie star 24 hours a day. The press chronicled every strange purchase, every new mansion, with a mixture of awe and amusement. He was living the dream, a bizarre, hyper-caffeinated Gothic dream. He was the host of this perpetual circus. He ran his life with a kind of manic precision, flying from a film set in Vancouver to his castle in England for the weekend, taking his entourage to his private island in the Bahamas. He was the sun around which his vast, expensive solar system of houses, cars, boats, and people revolved. For a decade, the sun burned impossibly bright, but no star can burn that hot forever. The fuel was running out, and a cold, dark night was coming. The turning point came without a dramatic explosion. It arrived in a manila envelope. On July 14, 2009, the Internal Revenue Service filed a tax lien against Nicolas Cage. The document stated he owed the federal government $6.2 million in unpaid income tax for the year 2007. It was the first crack in the facade, a sign that the intricate, chaotic financial machinery of his life was breaking down. That was just the beginning. Soon, another lien appeared for unpaid taxes from 2002, 2003, and 2004, totaling another $7 million. The total bill was over $13 million, and that was just the federal government. State taxes were also due. The numbers were catastrophic. For the public, it was a shock. How could a man who made $20, $40, even $60 million a year not pay his taxes? The answer was simple and brutal. His spending had finally outpaced even his colossal income. The lifestyle, the 15 houses, the yachts, the jet, the staff, the constant acquisitions required a monstrous amount of cash to maintain, not just to buy, but to keep. Property taxes alone ran into the millions each year. The burn rate was astronomical. When the income stream slowed even slightly, the entire structure became unstable. Cage's unraveling played out in the harsh glare of the public spotlight. He was no longer the eccentric genius. He was the fool who had lost a fortune. He did what many do when their world collapses. He looked for someone to blame. In October 2009, he filed a $20 million lawsuit against his longtime business manager, Samuel J. Levin. The lawsuit was a bombshell. Cage accused Levin of gross mismanagement and placing his money in high-risk and speculative real estate investments. He claimed Levin had failed to pay his taxes, concealed the true state of his finances, and led him down a path toward financial ruin. He painted a picture of a trusting artist betrayed by a negligent advisor. Levin's response was even more explosive. He countersued, and in his legal filing, he laid bare the truth of Cage's spending in devastating detail. It was a document that would become the script for Cage's public humiliation. Levin claimed he had repeatedly warned the actor that his lifestyle was unsustainable. He alleged that Cage was spending his money as fast as he earned it. The filing read like a list of a mad king's indulgences. The 15 personal residences, the fleet of 4 luxury yachts, the Gulfstream jet, the island in the Bahamas. Levin stated that in 2007 alone, Cage had bought 3 new homes for over $33 million. He had purchased 22 cars, including 9 Rolls-Royces. He had bought 12 expensive pieces of jewelry and 47 pieces of art. Levin's central claim was blunt. He had advised Cage that he needed to earn $30 million a year just to maintain his lifestyle. He had counseled Cage to spend less, but the actor refused to listen. The lawsuit was a desperate attempt, Levin argued, to deflect blame for his own compulsive, self-destructive spending. The narrative was set. Nicolas Cage wasn't a victim. He was the architect of his own demise. The dream had become a nightmare. The magnificent mansions, once symbols of his success, were now millstones around his neck. The Grail quest had led him to a dungeon of debt. The houses were no longer homes. They were assets, liabilities, each one a ravenous beast, consuming money for taxes, maintenance, insurance, and staff. He had to close off wings of his castles. He had to dismiss the armies of people who kept his empire running. The grandeur started to feel like a mockery. The empty rooms in the Bel Air mansion, the silent halls of the German Schloss, the deserted beaches of his private island. They were monuments to a spectacular failure. The very things he had acquired to feel secure had become the source of his greatest insecurity. The houses were eating him alive. The final act was a brutal public liquidation, a fire sale of a life's collection. To pay the IRS, to pay his creditors, to stay afloat, he had to sell everything. The empire was dismantled, piece by painful piece. The foreclosures began. Lenders, tired of waiting, moved to reclaim their collateral. In 2009, his 2 beloved New Orleans homes, the haunted La Laurie Mansion and the pristine chapel, were lost to foreclosure. They were sold at auction for a fraction of what he had paid. The Bel Air Palace, the center of his Hollywood universe, was next. It, too, fell into foreclosure and was sold. His Las Vegas mansions met the same fate. The rest he sold himself, often at a significant loss. The market had crashed, and he was a desperate seller. The magnificent Gray Craig estate in Newport, which he had bought for over $15 million, sold for just $6 million. A devastating loss. The castles in Germany and England were put on the market. The private island in the Bahamas was listed for sale. His other treasures were also auctioned off: the fleet of cars, the jewelry, the art. His prized comic book collection was a source of much-needed cash. The legendary Action Comics #1, which had been stolen from his home years earlier and miraculously recovered, was sold in 2011 for a record-breaking $2.16 million. The Holy Grail itself had to be sacrificed to pay the bills. Nicolas Cage, the $20 million man, was now the face of Hollywood bankruptcy. His personal tragedy was a public spectacle. Every sale, every foreclosure was a headline. The king was dethroned. His kingdom was in ruins. The death of the A-list movie star was slow and painful. The big-budget studio films dried up. The $20 million paychecks vanished. To pay off his monumental debts, Nicolas Cage had to work relentlessly. He entered what fans call his VOD era. He began churning out multiple movies a year, most of them low-budget, direct-to-video action thrillers and genre films. His obituaries were written while he was still alive. He became a meme, a punchline, a YouTube compilation of his most manic on-screen moments. He was seen as a has-been, a fallen star selling his dignity for a paycheck. But the narrative was more complex. He wasn't just working, he was atoning. He made a decision. He would not declare bankruptcy. He would pay back every penny he owed. And so he worked, and worked, and worked. The estates he lost took on new lives. They became footnotes in his biography, physical reminders of his spectacular rise and fall. The LaLaurie mansion was bought at auction by a Texas-based energy magnate. It remains a private residence, its dark history now layered with the more recent ghost of a Hollywood star's lost dream. The Bel Air mansion was purchased by a developer. Its interiors, once filled with Cage's eccentricities, were likely stripped bare, waiting for a new owner with a different fantasy. The castles in Europe found new, quieter masters. Schloss Niedstein was sold to a German lawyer. Midford Castle was bought by a British businessman. They reverted to what they were before he found them: historic properties, not props in a movie star's life. His private island was sold. The houses outlived his tenure. They absorbed his story and moved on, their stone walls holding the faint echo of his brief, brilliant, chaotic reign. For a time, the story of Nicolas Cage was one of neglect and ruin. His career was in a ditch. His reputation was shattered. He became a cultural ghost story, a tale told to warn young actors about the dangers of excess. He was a fixture on "Where Are They Now" lists. His name became synonymous with financial catastrophe. But then a strange thing happened, a rediscovery. People started watching his VOD movies, and they saw that even in the schlock, he was still giving it his all. He was still Nicolas Cage. He never phoned it in. A new generation of fans and critics began to appreciate his commitment, his unwavering dedication to his nouveau shamanic craft, regardless of the budget. Then came the Renaissance, a series of critically acclaimed performances in independent films. In the psychedelic horror film Mandy, he delivered a performance of raw grief and rage that was hailed as a masterpiece. In Pig, he played a reclusive truffle hunter with a quiet, soulful dignity that reminded everyone of his immense talent. He was nominated for a Critics' Choice Award. The artist was back. In 2022, he starred as himself in The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. It was a brilliant meta-commentary on his own life, his fame, his debt, and his public persona. He played Nick Cage, a washed-up actor haunted by his younger, more arrogant self, desperate for one more great role. He confronted his own myth head-on, with humor and grace. The film was a triumph. The comeback was complete. Today, Nicolas Cage is debt-free. He paid it all back. The years of relentless work, of taking any role to make good on his obligations, had finally borne fruit. He lives more modestly now, primarily in Las Vegas. He still has his eccentricities. He still has his unique philosophy on life and art. But he is chastened. He survived the inferno. He is married again, a father to a young child. He has found a measure of peace. The Grail quest is over. He no longer needs to buy castles to feel like a king. He is content to be an actor, an artist, Nicolas Cage. So what is the legacy of this fallen empire? The mansions stand as silent witnesses. They are a reminder that a house is a machine that eats resources, that dreams have a price, that wealth is fleeting, and debt is patient. They tell a story of ambition, of a man who wanted to live a life as grand as his imagination, and for a time actually did. Was the Grail quest a fool's errand, a catastrophic failure of judgment? Or was it something more? Perhaps it was the only way he knew how to live. An all-or-nothing bet on a life less ordinary. He built a kingdom of impossible beauty and staggering excess. He reigned over it, and he lost it all. But the story did not end there. The man who built the empire outlived its ruin. He paid the price for his dream. And in doing so, he found something more valuable than any castle. A second act. Nicolas Cage endures, and the ghosts of his magnificent cursed mansions whisper his name into the wind.